The rifle fired with a boom that echoed off the snowy cliffs of Utah. The shot was not to kill, but to warn. Wild Wolf watched the small group of knights approaching his sacred territory, his hand steady on the trigger as he calculated the distance between them. The intruders stopped abruptly, their horses shaken by the falling snow and the echo of the shot. Among them, one figure stood out, a young woman wearing a red shawl that contrasted dramatically with the wintry landscape. Even from a distance, Wild Wolf could see his proud, defiant stance. It was Isabella Martinez, the daughter of the Mexican rancher who had settled in the valley less than a year ago, bringing with her not only cattle and fences, but also old stories of conflicts with the Ute. "This is sacred Ute land," Wild Wolf shouted in English, his voice carrying the weight of generations of his tribe. "Go back to your ranch." Isabella pulled on her horse's reins, keeping herself upright in the saddle. His dark eyes shone with determination as he replied, "We are looking for lost livestock. We have the right to search our property." The biting wind from the mountains carried increasingly dense snowflakes, and Wild Wolf could feel the storm approaching. He had learned to read the signs of the weather since he was a child, just like his father and grandfather before him. This would be no ordinary blizzard. It would be one of those that buried men alive and froze the blood in their veins. "The storm is coming," he warned, climbing down from his perch on the rocks. "Your animals are already dead or have found shelter. You must do the same." The group of cowboys accompanying Isabella began to murmur among themselves. One of them, older and apparently more sensible, lightly pulled the reins of Isabella's horse. "Señorita Martinez, your father will kill us if anything happens to you. The Indian is right about the storm." But Isabella had inherited her stubbornness from her father, Don Ricardo Martinez, a man who had built his cattle empire through willpower and unyielding determination. "I will not return without that herd," she declared. "Dad invested everything we had in those cattle." Wild Wolf looked at the determination in her eyes and saw something familiar, the same fire that burned within his own people as they fought to preserve their lands and traditions. At 25, he was already one of the most respected warriors in his tribe, not only for his skill with weapons, but for his wisdom in recognizing when to fight and when to seek another path. The sky was quickly darkening, and the first howls of the wind announced imminent disaster. The cowboys, now visibly nervous, began to retreat. "Señorita, please," they begged. "Go," Isabella ordered the men. "Tell Dad I'll keep looking." "You will die if you stay," Wild Wolf declared, his voice softer now, but no less firm. Isabella turned to face him, her black eyes meeting his. "Then I will die, but I will not return to see my father lose everything he worked for." The cowboys, after a moment's hesitation, reluctantly departed, leaving Isabella alone with the Ute warrior. The snow was beginning to fall more heavily, and the wind had turned into a constant roar. Wild Wolf knew these mountains well. He knew about every cave, every passage, every natural shelter. He also knew the stories his people told about the Martinez, stories of conflicts with indigenous tribes in Mexico, of lands taken by force, of blood spilled on both sides. "There's a cave half an hour away," he said finally, his voice cutting through the wind. "If you want to live to find your cattle tomorrow, come with me now." Isabella hesitated, her fingers tightening on the reins as she weighed her options. Prejudice and distrust fought against his survival instinct. His father had always said that the Ute were treacherous savages, that his words could not be trusted. But when he looked at Wild Wolf again, he saw something in his eyes that contradicted all the stories he had heard throughout his life. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice almost lost in the howling wind. "Because death knows no skin color or ancient history," he replied simply. "And because these mountains have seen too much blood." A distant thunder sealed the silent agreement between them, Isabella nodded slightly and guided her horse in the direction indicated by Wild Wolf. As they rode side by side through the thickening snow, they both felt the weight of generations of conflict on their shoulders. The storm raged around them, quickly erasing their tracks in the snow. The world had turned into a white whirlwind, where only Wild Wolf's experience in the mountains kept them on the right path. Isabella watched her guide with a mixture of fascination and apprehension, noting how he moved with natural grace even in the most adverse conditions. When they finally reached the cave, they were both covered in snow and shivering from the cold. The entrance was narrow, but the interior offered ample space and protection from the biting wind. Wild Wolf quickly began to gather dry wood that was stored at the back of the cave. Clearly, this was one of his emergency shelters. "Did you plan this?" Isabella asked, still suspicious as she dismounted. Wild Wolf just smiled faintly as he lit the fire. "I plan to survive in these mountains. The rest, the Great Spirit decides." As the flames began to dance, casting shadows on the cave walls, Isabella and Wild Wolf found themselves in a silent stalemate, separated not just by the fire between them, but by decades of stories, prejudices, and fears. Outside, the storm continued to rage, forcing two different worlds to share the same space, even if momentarily. What neither of them knew was that that night would mark the beginning of a story that would challenge everything they both believed they knew about love, loyalty, and the bonds that define us. The silence inside the cave was interrupted only by the crackling of the fire and the incessant howling of the wind outside. Isabella removed her sodden shawl, wringing out the icy water as she watched Wild Wolf feed the flames with dry twigs. His movements were precise and economical, as if each gesture had been honed by generations of mountain survival. "Why does a woman ride alone looking for cattle in a storm?" Wild Wolf asked finally, his low voice competing with the roar of the blizzard. Isabella lifted her chin, a gesture her father said was identical to her late mother's. "I wasn't alone. You saw the cowboys yourself." "Cowboys you dismissed," he replied, his dark eyes reflecting the flames. "Why?" "Because—" She hesitated, remembering the heated argument with her father that morning. "Because I need to prove something." Wild Wolf nodded slightly, as if he understood more than what she had said. "To others or to yourself?" The question caught her off guard. Isabella watched the Ute warrior for a moment, noting the subtle scars on his exposed arms, the feathers woven into his black hair, the amulets he wore around his neck. Every detail told a story that she had been taught to fear and despise. "My father lost 30 head of cattle last week," she explained, approaching the fire. "Some of your men have suggested that your people might be stealing our livestock." The muscles in Wild Wolf's jaw visibly contracted. "And you believe that?" "I don't know what to believe," she admitted. "I grew up hearing stories about the Ute, about conflicts and betrayals. But I also grew up seeing how white people treat native people, how they lie and steal their land." Distant thunder echoed through the cave, making the horses stir restlessly near the entrance. Wild Wolf stood up to calm them down, whispering soothing words in his native tongue. Isabella watched as the animals responded to him, relaxing under his gentle touch. "My people don't steal cattle," he said as he returned to the fire. "We hunt what we need, as we always have. Your fences and your herds are changing these lands, changing the buffalo's paths, destroying sacred places." Isabella felt the weight of the accusation in his words. "And what do you suggest? That we abandon everything and leave?" "I suggest we learn to divide the land, as the ancients did," he replied, surprising her with the softness in his voice. "Before the fences, before the wars, there was room for everyone." The wind howled more powerfully, bringing a flurry of snow into the cave. Isabella shivered, pulling her still damp shawl tighter around her shoulders. Without saying a word, Wild Wolf removed his own fur blanket and offered it to her. "I don't need your charity," she protested, but her chattering teeth betrayed her cold. "It's not charity," he replied calmly. "It's survival, and survival knows no pride." Reluctantly, she accepted the blanket, wrapping herself in its warmth and the scent of leather and herbs that emanated from it. The simple gesture seemed to break down yet another barrier between them. "How did you learn to speak English so well?" she asked, trying to fill the silence that threatened to engulf them. A sad smile touched Wild Wolf's lips. "At the mission school. 7 years learning their language, their customs, their prayers. They wanted to transform us into something we are not." "And why did you return to your people?" "Because even beneath white clothes and English words, my heart kept beating to the rhythm of Ute drums," he replied, his eyes lost in the flames. "Some call it savagery. I call it truth." Isabella felt something change inside her, as if old certainties were beginning to melt like snow in the sun. "My mother died when I was 12, she shared suddenly. "It was attacked by bandits on the border with Mexico. For years, my father told me it was Indians, but then I discovered the truth. It was easier for him to blame the natives than to accept that his own people could be so cruel." Wild Wolf studied her for a long moment. "Hate is like poison," he said finally. "Kill the one who carries it first." A thoughtful silence fell between them, filled only by the sounds of the storm and the dancing fire. Isabella realized that she was seeing Wild Wolf differently now, not as the savage of her father's stories, but as a man with his own story, his own pain, his own wisdom. "When the storm passes," she began hesitantly, "will you help me look for the lost cattle?" He watched her curiously. "Why?" "Because you know these mountains better than anyone. And because—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because maybe it's time to start building bridges instead of fences." A long moment passed before Wild Wolf responded, his voice carrying the weight of generations of distrust and conflict. "Bridges are fragile when built on foundations of hate." "Then we will build new foundations," Isabella replied with determination. "One step at a time." The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. Outside, the storm continued its fury, but inside the cave, something new and unexpected was beginning to be born, a mutual understanding that defied decades of prejudice and distrust. When sleep finally began to overcome them, they each settled down on their side of the cave, but the space between them no longer seemed as vast as before. The snow continued to fall outside, covering the world with a white blanket that erased old trails and created the possibility of new paths. Dawn arrived with the storm still howling outside the cave, although its fury had abated during the night. Isabella woke up wrapped in the Wild Wolf fur blanket, her body sore from the hard but warm floor. Across the dying embers, the Ute warrior was already standing, watching the cave entrance with watchful eyes. "The snow has partially blocked the entrance," he reported without turning around. "We'll have to wait a few more hours before leaving." Isabella got up, adjusting her clothes and trying to tame the dark hair that had come loose in her sleep. "How do you know it's only a few hours? The sky is still dark." "The mountains speak to us if we know how to listen," Wild Wolf replied, finally turning to her. "The wind has changed overnight. It's bringing warmer air from the south." As he rekindled the fire, Isabella took a small package of dried meat and bread from her bag, offering some of it to him. For a moment, Wild Wolf hesitated, decades of distrust weighing on his gesture, before accepting the offer with a curt nod of thanks. "My father will send men to look for me," Isabella commented as they ate. "He is not known for his patience or understanding." "Don Ricardo Martinez," Wild Wolf pronounced the name carefully. His fame precedes him in the mountains. They say he built his ranch on an old Ute burial ground. Isabella swallowed hard, remembering the old bones that workers had found during the construction of the ranch. His father had ordered them unceremoniously removed, ignoring the protests of the few natives still living in the valley. "I didn't know," she lied, but her flushed cheeks betrayed her. "You did know," Wild Wolf corrected her gently. "Just as you know that your father lies about the fate of our people. The question is, why do you choose to pretend you don't know?" The question hit Isabella like a well-aimed arrow. It was true. She had witnessed countless injustices over the years, choosing the comfort of silence over the weight of the truth. "It's not that simple," she defended herself, but her voice lacked conviction. "My father lost a lot in the wars with the natives in Mexico. His bitterness has deep roots." "And so the cycle continues," Wild Wolf observed, his words filled with ancient wisdom. "Children carry their parents' hatred, like burdens too heavy for their shoulders." A pensive silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant moan of the wind. Isabella studied the Ute warrior's profile, noting how the light from the flames danced across his strong features, highlighting scars that told stories of battles past. "How can we break this cycle?" she asked finally, her voice little more than a whisper. Wild Wolf stared at her, his dark eyes piercing. "Starting by recognizing the truth in our own hearts. What do you really see when you look at me, Isabella Martinez? A savage from your father's stories, or a man trying to protect his people and their traditions?" The question caught her off guard. Isabella felt her heart accelerate under the weight of that direct gaze. I see someone who could have let me die in the storm, but chose to save me. Someone who knows the mountains as he knows himself. Someone who carries the wisdom of his ancestors with pride, not shame." A faint smile touched Wild Wolf's lips, softening his features. "And I see a woman strong enough to question the truths she has been taught. Perhaps that is why the Great Spirit has brought us together in this storm." Isabella felt something shift inside her, as if a long-closed door began to open. "When we find the lost cattle," she began hesitantly, "I would like to learn more about your people. About the sacred places that we destroyed. And what will you tell him about spending time with a savage?" Wild Wolf asked, a hint of bitterness in his voice. "The truth," she replied with newfound firmness. "That it's time to build bridges instead of walls. That there's enough room in these lands for everyone if we learn to respect each other." The Ute warrior studied her for a long moment before responding. "Brave words, but words are like leaves in the wind if they are not supported by actions." "Then teach me," Isabella insisted, leaning forward. "Show me the ancient paths, the sacred places. Help me understand, so I can help others understand too." Wild Wolf was silent for several minutes, as if weighing not only his words, but all the possible consequences of them. When he finally spoke, his voice was full of suppressed emotion. "My real name is Ahote," he revealed. "It means restless in the language of my people. My mother gave me that name because she said that even in the womb I couldn't sit still, always looking for something beyond." "Ahote," Isabella repeated softly, savoring the sound of the name on her tongue. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because names have power," he explained. "Sharing a real name is an act of trust. And maybe it's time to trust that some changes are possible." Daylight was beginning to strengthen, filtering through the curtain of snow at the cave entrance. Isabella could feel that something fundamental had changed between them during that conversation, a change as subtle as the first breath of spring, but equally inevitable. "The storm is abating," Ahote announced, standing up to check on the horses. We'll soon be able to look for your cattle. Isabella nodded, but her thoughts were far from the lost herd. I was thinking about how a single night could change not just the course of 2 lives, but perhaps the course of 2 cultures in conflict. As they prepared to leave, Isabella realized that the real challenge would not be finding the lost cattle in the snowy mountains, but finding a way through the decades of prejudice and misunderstanding that separated their people. It was a journey that promised to be more dangerous than any storm, but for the first time she felt that she was not alone on this path. The morning mist still hung over the mountains when Isabella and Ahote emerged from the cave. The world around them had transformed overnight. Deep snow covered everything in a pristine blanket of white, completely altering the familiar landscape. The silence that followed the storm was almost sacred, broken only by the soft crunch of their footsteps on the freshly fallen snow. The cattle probably sought shelter in the lower valleys, Ahote commented as he helped Isabella mount. They know the survival instinct better than we do. Isabella adjusted the reins, watching as her horse sank knee-deep in the soft snow. How can we find any tracks with all this snow? A faint smile touched Ahote's lips. Mountains keep their secrets, but they always leave clues for those who know how to read their signs. He pointed to a set of broken branches, half covered in snow. See how they're bent. Large animals passed through here, moving south. They began to ride side by side, Ahote leading the way through narrow passes and steep slopes. Isabella watched in fascination as he interpreted each mark in the snow, each broken branch, each subtle depression in the ground. It was as if he could read a story written in the landscape itself. My people have followed these paths for generations, he explained, noting their interest. Every mountain, every valley, every stream has a name and a story. They are the veins and arteries of our land. And now we have come with our fences and our cattle cutting these veins, Isabella reflected bitterly. Yes, Ahote replied, his voice soft but firm. But perhaps it is not too late to find a new path, one that respects both the old and the new. They continued riding in silence for some time, each lost in their own thoughts. The sun was rising in the sky, making the snow sparkle like thousands of diamonds. Isabella found herself studying Ahote's profile against the morning light, noting how he moved in perfect harmony with his horse, as if they were a single creature. Suddenly, Ahote raised his hand, signaling them to stop. "Listen," he whispered. At first, Isabella heard nothing but the wind in the trees. Then, distant but unmistakable, came the sound of mooing. "They survived," she whispered, a smile of relief lighting up her face. "Some of them, at least," Ahote agreed, "but they are not alone." Before Isabella could ask what he meant, a howl echoed across the mountains, the chilling sound of a hungry wolf. The storm also brought the predators to the lower valleys, Ahote explained, already leading his horse in the direction of the sounds. "We need to hurry." They rode faster now, urgency giving new energy to their movements. Isabella could feel her heart beating faster, not just from worrying about the cattle, but from the adrenaline of the hunt and the closeness of Ahote, who occasionally touched her arm to guide her through more difficult passages. Finally, they reached a small valley protected by rocky cliffs. There, clustered by a rock formation, was a group of about 20 head of cattle, part of his father's lost herd. And circling the frightened herd, 3 grey wolves moved with predatory purpose. "Don't shoot," Ahote instructed when he saw Isabella reach for her gun. "There's a better way." He gently dismounted and took out a small hand drum from his bag. With precise movements, he began to beat a strong and regular rhythm, while at the same time emitting a guttural sound from his throat. An ancient chant that seemed to resonate through the valley itself. Isabella watched in wonder as the wolves stopped their approach, their ears moving restlessly to the sound of the drum. The cattle also responded, the panic in their eyes gradually receding. "Wolves are our older brothers," Ahote explained between beats. "They understand respect and territory. We don't need to kill them to protect what's ours." Slowly, as if responding to an invisible command, the wolves began to retreat. His yellow eyes remained fixed on Ahote for a long moment before they disappeared into the shadows of the forest. "That was amazing," Isabella breathed, getting off her horse to join him. "How did you learn to do that?" "My grandfather was a medicine man," Ahote replied, reverently putting away the drum. "He taught me that every creature has its place in the circle of life. Our job is not to destroy that circle, but to find our place within it." Isabella approached the cattle, which were now calming in the morning sun. They were strong, well-fed animals, proof that they had found sustenance even during the storm. "You see?" Ahote pointed to the grazing marks in the snow. "They found shelter here because they know the land. The mountains protected them, as they protect everyone who respects them." "How they protected us," Isabella added softly, her eyes meeting his. A moment of understanding passed between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. The sun was now high in the sky, melting the snow and revealing patches of the dark earth below, like long-buried secrets coming to light. "Your father will be looking for you," Ahote said finally, breaking the moment. "Yes," Isabella agreed, reluctant to leave that valley where so many truths had been revealed. "But this isn't goodbye, is it?" Ahote studied her for a long moment before responding. "The mountains have many stories to tell, Isabella Martinez, and you've barely begun to hear them." "Then teach me more," she insisted, taking a step towards him. "Tomorrow, at sunset, at the bend in the river where the willows grow." "Your father wouldn't approve." "My father will have to learn that there is more than one way to see the world," she replied with determination, "just as I'm learning." A slow smile spread across Ahote's face, transforming his stern features into something softer, younger. "At sunset, then," he agreed. "Bring your open heart and your listening ears. The mountains have much to teach those willing to learn." As they gathered the cattle for the long journey back to the ranch, Isabella felt that something fundamental had changed within her. The mountains were no longer just an obstacle to be conquered, or a land to be surrounded. They were a living book of stories and wisdom, waiting to be read by those brave enough to question everything they thought they knew. And maybe, she thought as she rode beside Ahote, true love began just like that, with the courage to question, the humility to learn, and the hope that tomorrow could be different from yesterday. The return to the Martinez Ranch was met with a mix of relief and palpable tension. Don Ricardo, a man of imposing stature and a neatly trimmed grey mustache, waited on the porch of the main house, his dark eyes sparkling with concern and contained anger. Beside him, a group of armed cowboys prepared to leave in search of Isabella. When his daughter appeared leading the lost herd, accompanied by Wild Wolf, the rancher instinctively reached for the revolver on his waist. Isabella noticed the gesture and spurred her horse, placing herself strategically between her father and the Ute warrior. "Gracias a Dios!" Don Ricardo exclaimed, descending the porch steps. "Isabella, have you lost your mind? Spending the night in the mountains during a storm?" "Daddy, we found the cattle," she replied, dismounting with grace. "And I owe my life to Ahote. He offered me shelter during the storm and helped me locate the animals." "Ahote?" His father spat out the name as if it were poison. "Since when did a savage have a name?" Isabella felt the blood boil in her veins. "Since always, Daddy, just like you have history, traditions, and rights to these lands." A tense silence fell over the ranch yard. The cowboys exchanged nervous glances as Ahote remained mounted, his dignified posture contrasting with the hostility around him. Don Martinez, Ahote spoke finally, his voice calm but firm. Your cattle are safe. We also found signs of other lost animals in the North Valley. With your permission, I can guide your men there. The rancher studied the Ute warrior suspiciously. And why would an Indian help a man he considers an invader? Because the mountains belong to no man, Ahote replied. They shelter us all if we learn to respect them. Isabella watched something subtly change in her father's countenance, an almost imperceptible hesitation in his usual mask of authority. Years of prejudice fought against the evidence before his eyes. His daughter alive, cattle recovered, and a savage offering help without asking anything in return. Daddy? Isabella took advantage of the moment of indecision. Ahote knows these lands better than anyone. He saved not only my life, but a considerable part of our investment. Isn't it time we started building bridges instead of building more walls? Don Ricardo ran his hand through his grey mustache, a gesture that Isabella recognized as a sign of deep reflection. A Martinez owes no favors to anyone, he finally declared. How much do you want for the ransom of my daughter and cattle, Indian? I don't want your money, Don Martinez, Ahote replied, but there is something that could benefit both of our people. The farmer raised an eyebrow, intrigued. And what would that be? Permission for my people to use the ancient hunting trails that run through their lands. In return, we offer our expertise in protecting their herd from predators and our wisdom about the changing seasons in these mountains. Isabella held her breath, watching her father's reaction. Ahote's proposal was more than a simple agreement. It was an opportunity to begin healing old wounds, to find a path of peaceful coexistence. Don Ricardo walked a few steps across the courtyard, his boots leaving deep marks in the melting snow. When he turned back, his face was serious. And how can I trust your people to respect the limits of this agreement? In the same way that we will have to trust that your fences will not continue to advance into our sacred lands, Ahote replied with dignity. Trust has to start somewhere, Don Martinez. Why not here? Why not now? A murmur ran among the cowboys, some nodding in silent approval. Isabella realized that she was not the only one who had begun to see Ahote and his people in a new light. 3 days, Don Ricardo finally announced. You have 3 days to prove to me that this deal can work. Show my men where the rest of the lost cattle are. Teach them about the predators. After that, we'll talk again. It was more than Isabella expected, although less than she wanted. But it was a start, a small crack in the wall of prejudice that had separated their cultures for so long. Gracias, senor. Ahote bowed his head slightly in respect. I will return at dawn to guide your men. As the Ute warrior began to walk away, Isabella felt a tightness in her chest. Her eyes met his briefly, and in that look was the silent promise of their meeting at sunset. Isabella, her father's voice brought her back to reality. Come in and warm up. We have a lot to talk about your adventure in the mountains. She obeyed, but each step toward the house seemed to take her a little further away from who she really wanted to be. Ahote's words echoed in his mind. Trust must start somewhere. As she crossed the threshold, Isabella made a silent promise to herself. She would be that bridge between two worlds, no matter the cost. Because in the snowy mountains of Utah, during a stormy night, she had discovered that true love knew no borders. Not those drawn on paper, not those erected by prejudice in the hearts of men. The sun began its descent over the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. Within hours, she would meet Ahote again, and together they would continue writing a story that defied generations of hatred and mistrust. A story that perhaps could change not only their lives, but the destiny of two people who had long forgotten how to share the blessings of the mountains. The sun began its descent over the horizon, when Isabella managed to escape the ranch's surveillance. He had spent the entire afternoon listening to his father's lectures on responsibility and the danger of trusting savages, but his mind was focused only on the promised meeting by the willows. He mounted his horse with restrained haste, trying not to attract attention as he headed towards the river. The air was colder now, carrying the damp scent of melting snow and newly exposed earth. Her heart beat at a rapid pace, not only from the anxiety of the secret meeting, but also from the fear of being discovered. As she approached the meeting point, Isabella slowed down, letting the gentle sound of the river guide her. The willows moved gently in the evening breeze, their long fringes touching the water's surface like delicate fingers. For a moment, he feared that Ahote would not come, that his obligations to his people or the natural distrust between their cultures would keep him away. But he was there, sitting on a flat rock by the river, so still that he seemed to be part of the landscape itself. When he saw her, a subtle smile lit up his face. "I thought your father would keep you trapped at the ranch," he commented as she dismounted. "He tried," Isabella replied, tying her horse next to his. "But there are things that not even Don Ricardo Martinez can control." "Like your daughter's heart?" Ahote asked softly, his dark eyes studying her with intensity. Isabella felt her cheeks flush, but held his gaze. "Like the truth," she replied. "And the truth is, I can no longer pretend that the world is as simple as my father wants it to be." Ahote nodded, gesturing for her to sit beside him on the rock. The sun now painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, turning the river into a mirror of liquid fire. "I brought you something," he said, removing a small leather bundle from his bag. Inside was a delicate necklace made of turquoise and silver beads. It was my mother's. She said that turquoise has the power to unite heaven and earth, just as it can unite hearts divided by old wounds. Isabella touched the necklace with trembling fingers, marveling at its simple beauty and the profound meaning of the gesture. "I can't accept something so precious." "You can and you must," Ahote insisted softly, "because you, Isabella Martinez, are like this river, strong enough to cut through rock, but gentle enough to nurture life on its banks." With reverent care, he placed the necklace around her neck. The touch of his fingers on her skin sent goosebumps throughout her body. For a moment they stayed like that, close enough to feel each other's breath, the world around them seeming to disappear. "How can we make this work?" Isabella whispered, her voice filled with suppressed emotion. "Our worlds are so different." "Maybe that's exactly why it needs to work," Ahote replied, his hand still resting lightly on his shoulder. "Because if we can both see past our differences, so can others." Isabella closed her eyes, letting his words sink into her heart. "My father will never accept—" "Your father is a man stuck in the past," Ahote interrupted gently. "But you, Isabella, you can see the future. A future where our people don't need to be enemies." "And what future would that be for both of us?" she asked, opening her eyes to look at him. Ahote was silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the waters of the river as if searching for answers in its steady flow. "Among my people, we say that true love is like water on dry land, too precious to be wasted through pride or fear." Gently, he touched her face, his fingers tracing a soft line from her temple to her chin. Isabella felt her heart accelerate even more, aware that they had crossed an invisible line from which there was no return. "Ahote," she began, but was interrupted by the distant sound of voices and horses' hooves. They both stood up quickly, the magic of the moment broken by the reality of their situation. "They are your father's men," Ahote said, already moving into the shadows of the willows. "You must go." "I don't want it to end like this," Isabella protested, holding his hand. "It's not ending," he assured, his fingers intertwining with hers for a brief moment. "It's just beginning. Tomorrow, when I come to help with the cattle, we'll find a way." Isabella nodded reluctantly, mounting her horse in a hurry. The voices were closer now. "How will I know it's not just a pipe dream?" Ahote smiled, that smile that seemed to light up his dark eyes like stars on a moonless night. "Touch the necklace when you doubt. It carries not only the history of my people, but also our promise of a different future." With one last lingering look, Isabella spurred her horse, following a path that would take her back to the ranch by a different route than the one her father's men seemed to be taking. The turquoise necklace rested warm against her skin, like a precious secret held close to her heart. As she rode through the twilight, Isabella thought about how a single day could change the entire course of a life. She had woken up that morning as the obedient daughter of Don Ricardo Martinez, heir to his lands and his prejudices. Now, beneath the starry sky that began to reveal itself, she was something more, a woman who had found her own truth in the snowy mountains of Utah, in the eyes of a Ute warrior, and in the dream of a love strong enough to build bridges across chasms of hate and mistrust. The night wind caressed your face like a silent blessing, carrying with it the promise that sometimes the greatest acts of courage don't happen on battlefields, but in the quiet moments when we choose to follow our heart, even when the entire world tells us we're wrong. The next dawn brought Ahote to the Martinez ranch as promised, accompanied by 2 other Ute warriors. Isabella watched from the balcony as her father welcomed the small group with a mixture of suspicion and reluctant curiosity. The turquoise necklace, carefully hidden beneath her blouse, seemed to beat against her skin like a second heart. "Estos son Koda and Takoda," Ahote introduced his companions. "They know the mountains as well as I do, and can help track the rest of your cattle." Don Ricardo studied the 2 warriors with critical eyes before nodding to his own men. "Miguel and Rafael will go with you, and you, Isabella, will stay here today." "But, Daddy," she protested, taking a step forward. "I know the herd better than anyone. I can help." "That's enough," his father cut in sharply. "You've had your adventure in the mountains. Now it's time to get back to your ranch duties." Isabella felt Ahote's gaze on her, conveying a silent message of patience. There was something else in his eyes too, a restrained urgency that made her realize he needed to tell her something important. The group departed soon after, leaving Isabella to struggle with a growing sense of restlessness. He spent the morning performing his usual tasks, but his mind was on the mountains, with Ahote and the secrets he seemed to carry. It was early in the afternoon that his opportunity came. Don Ricardo was called away to settle a land dispute with a neighboring ranch, leaving Isabella under the more lenient supervision of Maria, the old housekeeper who had raised her since her mother's death. "Voy al huerto," Isabella informed Maria, who just nodded absently as she continued her sewing work. Instead of the garden, Isabella quickly went to the stables, saddled her horse, and headed towards the mountains. He knew the territory well now, and suspected he would find the search party near the valley where they had found the first herd. His instinct was right. After an hour of riding, he saw smoke from a small fire among the trees. Approaching cautiously, he found Miguel and Rafael resting while the 3 Utes examined markings in the ground a few meters away. Ahote lifted his head at the sound of their approach, a brief smile touching his lips before being replaced by a more serious expression. With a discreet gesture, he indicated that she should follow him away from the group. "Something's wrong," Isabella said once they were out of reach of the others. "I can see it in your eyes." "Yes," Ahote confirmed, his voice low and strained. "We found signs that your cattle are not just lost, they are being stolen, and not by my people." Isabella felt her heart accelerate. "Who then?" A group of bandits who have caused trouble for both the whites and the Ute, he explained. They are led by a man named Snake Hayes. He and his men hide in the mountains, stealing cattle and attacking travelers. Why didn't you tell my father about this? Because Snake Hayes has connections with some ranchers in the area, Ahote replied, his dark eyes meeting hers. Men who prefer to blame my people for robberies while they profit from stolen cattle. Isabella reached for her turquoise necklace, drawing strength from the words Ahote had said the night before about uniting divided hearts. We need proof. Something my father can't ignore. That's why I sent Koda and Takoda to follow the older trails. Ahote nodded. They found signs of a large camp in the eastern mountains. If we could... A sharp whistle interrupted him, the agreed warning signal with his companions. Within seconds, the sound of horses' hooves echoed through the valley. Quickly, Ahote whispered, pulling Isabella behind a rock formation. It's Snake Hayes' men. Pressed together behind the rocks, they watched a group of 6 horsemen pass near their hiding place. The leader, a tall man with a prominent scar on his face, had to be Snake Hayes. They carried rifles and had an air of dangerous confidence in their movements. They're heading toward the ranch, Isabella whispered, fear tightening her chest. No, Ahote corrected, his eyes following the bandits' movement. They're heading east, probably back to camp. They must have just finished another robbery. Isabella felt Ahote's breath on the back of her neck, aware of their physical proximity and the tension of the moment. We need to follow them, she declared. Find your camp. Find out where the stolen cattle are. It's too dangerous, Ahote protested, though his eyes revealed admiration for his courage. More dangerous is to let them continue stealing and placing the blame on your people, she replied firmly. If we don't do something, this land will never know peace. Ahote studied her for a long moment, his expression a mix of concern and determination. You have the spirit of a Ute warrior, he said finally, lightly touching the necklace on her neck. Brave and true as the earth itself. Then help me do what's right, she begged, covering his hand with her own. The moment was interrupted by the return of Koda and Takoda, who quickly reported in their native language. Ahote listened carefully before turning to Isabella. They found the camp, he translated. It's bigger than we thought, with at least 20 men. They have makeshift pens in the mountains where they keep the stolen cattle. We need a plan, Isabella declared, her mind already racing through the possibilities. A way to expose the truth without starting a war. Ahote nodded, a gleam of admiration and something deeper in his eyes. And we need to do this before Snake Hayes finds out we're on his trail. If he suspects we know the truth. Then there is no time to waste, Isabella concluded, her determination growing. Tonight, when my father returns, I will tell you what we discovered. But I will need you by my side, Ahote. I will need you to show him that the true threat comes not from his people, but from those who hide behind lies and prejudice. The sun began its descent over the horizon, painting the mountains with shades of gold and crimson. Isabella and Ahote stood there, united not only by their shared secret, but by the growing certainty that their love could be the key to changing the fate of 2 cultures long divided by fear and distrust. The approaching night promised to be just the beginning of a greater battle, not just against Snake Hayes and his thugs, but against generations of prejudice and hatred. And as dusk embraced the mountains of Utah, 2 hearts beat in unison, strengthened by the certainty that some truths are too strong to remain hidden in the shadows. Don Ricardo's return to the ranch was marked by palpable tension in the air. Isabella waited on the porch, the turquoise necklace hidden beneath her blouse as a silent reminder of her mission. Ahote and his companions had returned as well, keeping a respectful distance as the rancher dismounted his horse. What's happening here? Don Ricardo questioned, casting a suspicious glance in the Ute's direction. Daddy, we need to talk, Isabella declared, her voice firm despite the nervousness that made her heart race. We discovered something important about the missing cattle. The farmer studied his daughter's face for a long moment before nodding briefly. En mi oficina, he ordered, turning on his heel toward the house. Isabella exchanged a quick look with Ahote, who responded with an almost imperceptible nod. She had convinced him to remain nearby, but out of sight, while she first tried to talk to her father alone. Don Ricardo's office was an austere room, decorated with maps of the region and some stuffed animal heads. The smell of leather and tobacco permeated the air, mixing with the growing tension between father and daughter. Snake Hayes, Isabella began bluntly, watching as her father stiffened at the name. He and his men are the ones truly responsible for the cattle rustling. Don Ricardo lit a cigar, the glow of the match momentarily illuminating the deep lines of worry on his face. How do you know this? Because we saw them today, she replied, keeping her voice steady. Ahote and his warriors have found their camp in the eastern mountains. They have makeshift enclosures where they keep their stolen cattle. Lies! Your father snapped, slamming his fist on the table. That Indian is manipulating you, Isabella. Snake Hayes is a respectable businessman. Respectable? Isabella let out a bitter laugh. A man who steals cattle and blames the Ute to cover up his crimes. What kind of respect is that, Daddy? The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Don Ricardo studied his daughter with eyes that mixed anger and something else. Fear, perhaps. Hay cosas que no entiendes, he said finally, his voice lower now. Agreements that maintain peace in this territory. Agreements based on lies do not bring true peace, Isabella replied, unconsciously touching the necklace beneath her blouse. Snake Hayes is stealing from all of us. Not just our livestock, but also our chance to build something better here. What do you suggest? His father asked bitterly. May I ally myself with the savages against white men? I suggest you open your eyes to the truth, she declared, straightening her shoulders. The Ute know these lands better than anyone. They can be our allies, not our enemies. At that moment a shot rang out outside, followed by screams and the frightened neighing of horses. Isabella rushed to the window in time to see several knights emerging from the gathering darkness, their silhouettes silhouetted against the twilight sky. Snake Hayes, she whispered, her heart freezing as she recognized the scarred figure of the bandit leader. Al suelo! Don Ricardo shouted, pulling his daughter down as a bullet shattered the window above them. Chaos ensued at the ranch. Shots were exchanged in the darkness, voices shouted orders in English and Spanish, and the air was filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. We need to get to the stables, Isabella said, her thoughts immediately turning to Ahote and his companions. Es muy peligroso, her father protested, but she was already moving, crouched, toward the back door. The courtyard was a war zone. Snake Hayes's men had surrounded the main house, while the ranch's cowboys took cover wherever they could. In the midst of the confusion, Isabella saw Ahote and his warriors moving like shadows, using the darkness to their advantage to outflank the attackers. Don Ricardo! Snake Hayes's hoarse voice cut through the night. Come out, and maybe I'll let your precious daughter live. He knows we discovered the truth, Isabella whispered to her father, who had followed her to the back door. That's why you're here, to silence us. Don Ricardo watched the chaos on his ranch, his expression slowly changing from anger to understanding. All this time, he murmured, all this time blaming the Indians, when in fact... A scream of pain cut through the night. One of Hayes's men had been hit by a Ute arrow. The precision and efficiency of the native warriors was impressive, even in the darkness. Daddy! Isabella grabbed her father's arm. We need to trust them. It's our only chance. For a long moment, Don Ricardo remained silent, the weight of years of prejudice fighting reality before his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "Miguel," he called quietly to his foreman, "gather the men. Let's follow the Utes' lead." The words seemed to change something in the night air. Gradually, the cowboys began to coordinate their movements with the native warriors, forming an increasingly tight circle around the bandits. Isabella watched in amazement as two cultures that had always considered each other enemies now worked in perfect harmony. Ahote conducted the strategy with silent gestures, his presence commanding respect from both Ute and cowboys. The moon emerged from behind the clouds, illuminating the ranch yard with its silvery light. Snake Hayes and his men, realizing they were outnumbered, began to retreat toward their horses. "This isn't over, Martinez," Hayes shouted as he mounted. "You chose the wrong side in this war." "No," Don Ricardo replied, his voice carrying a new certainty. "For the first time, I believe I chose the correct side." As the bandits disappeared into the night, leaving behind two of their injured men, a different silence fell over the ranch. It wasn't the tense silence of before, but something new, the silence of possibility, of change, of hope. Isabella found Ahote in the middle of the courtyard, their hands touching briefly in the dark. The turquoise necklace seemed to burn against her skin, no longer like a secret, but like a promise of a different future. "It's not finished," Don Ricardo said, approaching them. "But maybe it's a start." And beneath the starry Utah sky, amid the rubble of a battle that had changed more than just the fate of one ranch, something new was beginning to be born. An alliance forged not just by necessity, but by the truth that Isabella and Ahote had discovered together, that love has the power to build bridges across history's deepest chasms. Dawn brought with it the first signs of the change that had taken place on the Martinez ranch. Don Ricardo was meeting with Ahote and the Ute leaders in the main room of the house, maps spread out on the table, showing the known routes of Snake Hayes and his men. The rancher's pride had given way to a prudent wisdom, born of the previous night's events. Isabella watched the scene from the doorway, the turquoise necklace now worn openly over her blouse. His father had noticed the jewel during breakfast, his eyes lingering on the meaning of the gift, but choosing to remain silent, a silence that said 1,000 words. "Hayes has 3 main camps," Ahote explained, his fingers tracing lines on the maps. "Here, in the eastern mountains, is where he keeps the stolen cattle. The other 2 are ambush points and hiding places." "How many men?" Don Ricardo asked, leaning over the map. "At least 20, Coda replied in halting English. "Maybe more now." Isabella approached the table, her eyes meeting Ahote's briefly before turning back to the map. "He's going to try to get revenge for what happened last night. We need to act first." "See," his father agreed, surprising everyone with his quick acquiescence. "But we need more help. The other rancheros must know the truth." "Some already know," Ahote said calmly, "and they chose to benefit from silence. Others are too afraid to act." Don Ricardo ran his hand through his grey moustache, a gesture that Isabella recognized as a sign of an imminent decision. "Then we will be the first ones. Snake Hayes is not just a threat to our herds. He is a threat to the peace we can build here." The sound of approaching hooves interrupted the meeting. Miguel, the foreman, hurriedly entered the room. "Don Ricardo, riders approaching, lots of them." Everyone moved to the porch, watching the cloud of dust approaching the ranch. Isabella felt her heart quicken, fearing that Snake Hayes had returned with more men. But when the knights became visible, a different surprise awaited them. At the head of the group was John Bradford, owner of the neighboring ranch and former rival of Don Ricardo. At his side, to everyone's astonishment, rode Chief Red Eagle, supreme leader of the Ute in the region. The contrast between the rancher in the dusty suit and the imposing native leader in his traditional attire could not be greater. "Ricardo," Bradford called as he dismounted. "We heard about last night's attack. Red Eagle and I have something to tell you about Snake Hayes." The next few hours were filled with revelations that completely changed the outlook of the conflict. Bradford confessed that Hayes had blackmailed him for months, threatening to expose shady dealings from his past if he didn't cooperate with the cattle rustling scheme. Other ranchers were in a similar situation, trapped in a web of lies and fear. Red Eagle, speaking through Ahote as translator, revealed that his people had discovered 3 more Hayes camps in the mountains, including one where he kept compromising documents on several important men in the territory. "That's why he was able to operate for so long," Isabella concluded, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. "He doesn't just have men and weapons, he has secrets." "But now we have something stronger," Ahote replied, his eyes shining with determination. "We have truth, and we have unity." Don Ricardo and Bradford exchanged long looks, decades of rivalry melting in the face of a common threat. "We can muster 30 men by nightfall," Bradford offered. "Los Ute can provide 20 warriors," Red Eagle declared through Ahote. "We know the mountains better than Hayes. We can surround you before you know what's happening." Isabella watched as her father straightened his stance, naturally assuming the leadership role he had always held. "So, tonight we attack. But not as whites against Indians, not as ranchers against bandits. We attack as a united people protecting their land." The rest of the day was dedicated to preparations. Messengers were sent to neighboring ranches, weapons were checked, strategies were refined. Isabella worked alongside Ahote, helping to coordinate communication between the two groups, who until then had barely been able to look each other in the eye. As the sun began to set, she found a moment of privacy with Ahote near the stables. "It's amazing how quickly everything changed," she commented, touching the turquoise necklace. "As if the mountains were just waiting for the right moment." Ahote smiled, that smile that made your heart dance. "My people say that big changes are like avalanches. They start with one small rock moving, then another, until the whole mountain seems to move at once." "And what was our little rock?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer in her heart. "Love," he replied simply, his hand finding hers. "The kind of love that is stronger than prejudice, deeper than fear, truer than any lie Hayes could weaponize." Isabella felt tears forming in her eyes, but they were tears of hope, not sadness. "When this is all over," she began. "When this is all over," Ahote added, "we will begin something new, something neither your father nor my people thought possible." The sound of horses being prepared for imminent battle filled the evening air. In just a few hours, they would set out to face Snake Hayes and his men, a united force born of the most unlikely of alliances. Isabella knew that the night would be long and dangerous, but for the first time since this whole story began, her heart was at peace. Because now she understood that some battles need to be fought not just with weapons, but with truth, courage, and above all, with love. The sun was setting over the mountains of Utah, painting the sky with colors that seemed to celebrate the union of two peoples, two cultures, two hearts. And as the shadows lengthened over the Martinez Ranch, the promise of a new dawn hung in the air, like a silent blessing over them all. Moonlight bathed the mountains of Utah as the combined force of ranchers and Ute warriors began their silent approach to Snake Hayes' camps. Isabella rode beside Ahote, her heart beating in a steady rhythm that echoed the gentle trot of horses through the melting snow. Don Ricardo had initially protested his daughter's participation in the mission, but Isabella demonstrated a determination that he recognized as a reflection of her own nature. "She has her mother's spirit," he had commented to Bradford, noting how she checked her weapons with the same precision she demonstrated when tending the ranch's ledgers. The plan was simple in its conception, yet complex in its execution. Ute warriors, led by Red Eagle, would surround the main camp from the north, using their knowledge of mountain trails to position archers on high points. The ranchers, divided into 3 groups, would attack from the other flanks, leaving only one escape route that would lead directly to an ambush in the western canyon. Hayes is like a cornered snake right now, Ahote muttered as they paused for the scouts to check the path ahead. More dangerous than ever. Isabella nodded, adjusting the turquoise necklace that had become her talisman of hope. But this time, he faces something he cannot corrupt or intimidate, the unity of our people. A silent signal passed through the line of riders. The scouts had returned with news. Hayes' camp was bustling, with men moving between the fires like disturbed ants. Apparently, some of their lookouts had noticed signs of the approach. "Es ahora o nunca," Don Ricardo declared, his voice low but firm. With a gesture, he sent the first group of ranchers to their designated positions. Isabella felt Ahote's hand briefly touch hers before he left with his warriors to take up their own positions. The touch was brief, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises. The minutes that followed seemed to drag by like hours as they waited for the agreed signal, the call of an owl that wasn't an owl. When it finally came, the night exploded into action. The first shot was fired by one of Hayes's men, but soon the air was filled with the whistle of arrows and the boom of rifles. Isabella and her group advanced along the eastern flank, taking advantage of the initial confusion to approach the pens where the stolen cattle were confined. "Traitor!" Snake Hayes's voice cut through the chaos of battle, directed at Bradford advancing with his men from the south. "You know what happens to traitors?" The answer came in the form of a Ute arrow that whizzed past the bandit's head, forcing him to seek cover. The plan was working. Hayes and his men were gradually being pushed towards the gorge, where more warriors waited. Isabella dismounted near the pens, working quickly to free the cattle, while others maintained cover. That's when he heard a scream that chilled his blood. Ahote had been hit. Without a second thought, she ran toward the sound, finding the Ute warrior lying behind a rock, blood pouring from a wound in his shoulder. "It's not serious," he assured, through clenched teeth, but his alert eyes were already searching for something beyond her. Isabella turned around in time to see Snake Hayes emerging from the shadows, his rifle aimed directly at them. "How touching," he mocked, his scarred face contorted into a cruel smile. "The ranch princess and her savage." "The only wild one here is you, Hayes," Isabella replied, her hand slowly moving towards her gun. "Don't move, señorita," Hayes warned, his finger lightly pressing the trigger. "It would be a shame to waste so much beauty." The moment seemed to stretch endlessly, the sound of the battle continuing in the background, Ahote's heavy breathing, Hayes's malevolent smile. Then 3 things happened almost simultaneously. A Ute war cry echoed from the rocks above, momentarily distracting Hayes. Isabella took advantage of the moment to draw her weapon, while Ahote, ignoring the pain, threw his knife with his good hand. Isabella's shot caught Hayes in the chest at the same time Ahote's knife plunged into his armed arm. The bandit staggered back, his eyes wide with surprise, before falling to his knees. "Impossible," he muttered, looking at the blood that was spreading on his shirt. "Killed by a woman and an Indian." They were his last words. As his body fell to the earth, a gradual silence began to spread across the camp. Hayes's men, seeing their fallen leader, began to surrender one by one. Don Ricardo arrived running, his eyes wide with concern at the sight of his daughter. "Are you good, my daughter?" "Estoy bien, papa," she replied, already turning to help Ahote. "But we need a doctor here." Dawn found the camp transformed. Surviving bandits were under guard, stolen cattle were being separated to return to their rightful owners, and a new kind of order was beginning to take hold. an order based on cooperation between peoples who had so long considered each other enemies. While the Ute medicine man treated Ahote's wound, Isabella remained at his side, their hands clasped together in a gesture that no one now dared question. Don Ricardo watched them from afar, his expression a mixture of resignation and newfound understanding. "Do you know what that means?" Ahote asked softly, his eyes meeting hers. "It means we can finally start building something new," she replied, touching the turquoise necklace. "Something based on truth, not fear." "It won't be easy," he warned, though a smile played on his lips. "There is a lot of prejudice and distrust to overcome." "But we are not alone on this journey," Isabella replied, watching as Ute and farmers worked side by side to organize the camp. "And love is stronger than any fence that men can build." The sun was rising over the mountains of Utah, their vibrant colors promising a new day, a new beginning. And as Isabella and Ahote watched the dawn together, they knew that their story was just the beginning of a greater change. A change that proved that true love can, in fact, overcome generations of prejudice and violence, building bridges where there were once only walls.